Okay, this is a really good question, and I think it relates, well, not I think, it will relate to anybody who has allowed your abusive parent to have access to your children. So if you have, and especially if you're carrying around any guilt around that, this video will be a really good one for you. Marnie, you talked about a harrowing event where you said that you believe your mother tried to unalive you and both arms were broken. I feel vicarious trauma when you speak of this. Just to clarify, and no shade here, I don't believe that my mother tried to unalive me. She did try to unalive me. She dropped me out of a 2-story window and would have had every reason to think that I would not have survived that fall. The fact that I did was not in her plan. It took me a long time to figure that one out. And I just wanted to clarify that because I'm kind of the word police a little bit. So I'm not offended or anything. I just want to make sure that I clarify that. Were you concerned for your daughter's safety in your mother's presence without supervision? This question is not meant to be judgmental. I think I know the answer. I appreciate you framing the question that way so very much. So thank you for being sensitive to how that might feel to me. I asked myself that question a lot, and I didn't just expose my eldest daughter and my son. He's the middle child, so he's not my youngest son. He's just my son. I felt so confused by the fact for many years as to why I allowed my mother access to them, and worse yet, I allowed my grandparents who molested me to have access to them. And thankfully, when my grandfather began to groom my daughter, I was able to notice that, and I cut contact immediately. My ex-husband and I both noticed that. And that's because in our household, we didn't have secrets and we had really open communication. My daughter would have been around, 5 or 6 years old. And it was definitely going to move in that direction. There's no question in my mind, and I'm not going to go into details around that. I felt so much guilt and anger towards myself for allowing my children to be exposed to those people for one single solitary second. Like, it weighed heavily on me for a really long time. And I couldn't figure out how I could be that mom who didn't protect them from that. That's how I felt. And through therapy and also just time of thinking about that and trying to figure out how could I put them in harm's way like that? And here's the answer. My mother didn't treat my daughter the way she treated me, and I didn't think my grandparents would treat my daughter the way that they treated me either. I didn't look at my grandmother as being a part of what my grandfather did. In fact, I didn't come to terms with that until about 5 years ago, where I connected the dots of memories I've always had, and I realized that my grandmother is how my grandfather had such easy access to me, and she was present the whole time and also completely unclothed. And I never connected those dots. So until like 5 years ago, which means that when I was in relationships with all these people and my kids were in relationships with them, I didn't have that perspective at all. It was very fractured. So there's that. The bigger reason though, and the number one reason, is because I knew that I was a dirty, damaged goods, bad, horrific little girl. And that I deserved the way my mother treated me, the way my grandparents abused me, all of that. And that was doubled down on because I was also violated by other people because I was pre-groomed for them. So I knew that there was something inherently wrong with me when I was in a relationship with all these people. And I knew that my children were the most perfect, beautiful beings, and nobody would ever harm them because why would you? I believed with every fiber of my being that the reason that people did the things that they did to me was because it was my fault. There was something wrong with me. And I equally believed that nobody would violate my children that way because they weren't deserving of it. It took me a long time to figure that one out. And that's why I gave them access. Full stop. I also, at one point, loved watching my mother with my daughter and see that soft side of her that I had never experienced. I didn't know she was triangulating me, and it was doubling down on that messaging. Like, I didn't realize what she was actually doing was showing me that my daughter was lovable and I wasn't, and that it was because of me. So that doubled down on that whole theme as well. And I'm just really grateful that at some point I woke up and I recognized that these people were not good for my children. And even what they did to me was good enough reason not to have them in my life. At that time, though, I did go no contact out of protection for my children, not out of protection for myself. I didn't know that I had a right to be in relationships with people who are kind, period, right? And safe, which goes along with kindness. There's more to your comment here, so let me see. I suspect that you weren't able to see that such a person is dangerous and shouldn't be left alone with any child, but that you took on the guilt your mother should have felt so that the family could be more normal. That is, you internalized that you were a bad child and your mother's behavior towards you was completely fine, which prevented you from protecting your own child. A professor in college referred to such attachments as narcissistic family fantasy bonds. I'd like to know your thoughts on this and if you'd be willing to share if you and your daughter ever talked about it. I appreciate your content. So I had copied and pasted this comment, and today when I made this video for you, the way I read it to you is how I've read it. In other words, I didn't read it all the way through and then respond. You can probably tell by that. So all of my children and I have talked about all this stuff. And sometimes we still do. Sometimes something will come up, a topic about the relatives or whatever, and we have very open dialogue around all of it. I have also specifically asked my eldest daughter if things did occur with my grandfather, if there was more to it, what she remembers or doesn't remember. And she assures me, and I obviously believe her, that no, it never went beyond that point where we recognized there was grooming going on. Also, I wrote a book about my experiences, and my two eldest children edited the book for me, and they also wrote the foreword. So they really know, well, and my youngest read the book too, but she just didn't participate in the editing and stuff like that. She's a yogi. And my two oldest are, educators, that sort of thing. So that's why, she just didn't want to participate in that aspect of the book, because she's not a writer. She didn't feel like that was something she wanted to do. Anyway, we talk about it. We talk about the family history. My daughter has also shared with me that she learned guilt because of my mother, because she felt very guilty that she was so elevated in the treatment she received from my mother as her golden grandchild. Watching, like, she would get gifts and different things, and my mother would ignore her little brother, and she felt very guilty for him. She's told me that when my mother would talk to me in a certain way or yell at her step grandfather at the time, that she felt very bad that she treated other people that way and didn't treat her that way. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't realize where that was being developed and living for my daughter. It taught her to feel guilty. It taught her to feel responsible for my mother's behavior in this twisted kind of way. And so when we think about that, as we're trying to navigate these relationships with our parents who aren't safe people for us, we need to remember, if they weren't safe for us, they're certainly not safe for our children. And are there exceptions to that statement? Sure, there can be. On a whole, though, watching their behaviors, and I want you to liken it back to what is that teaching your child love looks like. And if their behaviors are, not treating you well in front of your children, not showing respect, encouraging secrecy and things like that, your child or children, they are learning that that's what love is, that is a part of it. And so in those cases, that's where they're not safe for your children. What do you want your children to know about relationships? What is healthy? What is not? And if the relationship you have with your parent isn't a healthy one, you're giving them access to your children because it looks better, and your children are watching all of these moving pieces. That's doing some damage to your child. And you might want to stop and think about what that looks like as they continue to grow. And the other part of this is, I'm so grateful that my children were young when I went no contact. If I had to do it all over again, they would have never for a second had access to my children. The fact that they were so young when my children became teenagers, it closed a loophole that a lot of these types of parents weaponize, where, the teenager is doing the things that teenagers do. They're trying to get their autonomy and they're being a little rebellious. I don't really like that word. They're trying to be independent and, they're making bad decisions because their frontal lobe and all the things. And then they run over to grandma and go, Mommy, she grounded me and she won't let me do this and that. And they're like, well, come spend the weekend here. You can do it here. Your mother's just being stupid and controlling. Let me tell you stories about what she did as a kid. And, undermining that safety and that structure and that relationship that you have with your child. A lot of times we end up losing that teenager to the grandparent because they're the fun one, while they're destroying your child in the process, right? Because they're not learning lessons in a safe environment. And, they may go down the tubes because they're being allowed to connect to people who aren't good influence in their life and things like that. And then lo and behold, when that child self-destructs because they don't have the guidance that they need, guess whose fault it is? They go, well, I tried to rescue them from that, but they already screwed them up before I got them. And that's how that rolls out. I see it all the time, unfortunately. So I'm not encouraging or discouraging estrangement, just to be clear. I am encouraging eyes wide open and you to assess what these relationships are for your children and making sure that they are your priority. Not, I don't want to do that to my mother and take the child away from my mother. No, your mother's not your responsibility. The grandparents aren't your responsibility. The people you chose, those little ones, to bring into this world, they are your only responsibility and your number one responsibility. And everything you put in front of them and connect them to should be healthy, or as healthy as it can be. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you for the question, comment. I very much appreciate it. And keep them coming, and I'll see you soon. Thanks again.